Welcome to Have History Will Travel. I am your host, the Wilder Historian, and I thought I would dive into the minor for my master's degree, Ancient European History, and talk about what life was like in ancient Sparta. For most people, two things stick out when they think of Sparta. One, they were militaristic, and two, they had a king named Leonidas. Of course, their history is much more complex and interesting, so I am here to give you a crash course on what life was like in ancient Sparta. I guess we should start with who set up their militaristic society, or at least who they believed set it up. The man's name was Lycurgus the Lawgiver. As one historian stated, in general nothing can be said concerning Lycurgus the Lawgiver that is not disputed, since there are different versions of his birth, travels abroad, death, and above all his work on the laws and constitution, and least of all is their agreement about the times in which he lived. Was he an actual historical figure? No one knows exactly, but that's not important. What's more important is his impact on Spartan society, culture, and government. It was his constitution and his laws that Spartans referred back to when conducting themselves in Spartan society. Two early wars forever altered the Spartan way of life. The First and Second Messenian Wars were the catalyst for the creation of the Spartan militaristic society. During the first of those wars, Sparta was expanding its territory and sought to subjugate their neighbors, the Messenians. Once the Spartans conquered them, they essentially enslaved their enemies and thus divided Sparta into two groups of people, the equals, or the Spartan citizens, and slaves, or the helots. The Messenians would revolt, which would start the Second Messenian War. This was a turning point for the Spartans. Having a slave population that outnumbered their own, they were in a state of anxiety about the revolts and thus instituted their militaristic lifestyle to protect themselves. Now let's discuss their governmental system. For one, they had co-rulers. Spartans traditionally believed two descendants of the Greek demigod Heracles founded Sparta, and not just two descendants, twins, Eurysthenes and Procles. They were the reason for Sparta being ruled by two kings simultaneously, each king being descended from either Eurysthenes or Procles. For example, when Leonidas was king, the other king of Sparta was named Leonidas. One of the most important roles that a king took on was the role of leaders during war. However, this was not solely a monarchy. Lycurgus was said to have created the Gerousia, or the Spartan Senate. It was composed of 30 members, including the two kings, that decided on important decisions. But one of their most famous decisions was whether a Spartan gained or lost their citizenship. They could also bring charges against a king for not fulfilling their duty. Historian Paul Cartledge explains that besides the kings, the other 28 members, who had to be aged at least 60, included always some relatives of the kings, and was indeed probably restricted to aristocrats, who were chosen in what Aristotle considered a parody of a free and fair election, and held office for life. Additionally, the Gerousia acted as a Spartan Supreme Court, who decided if proposals were lawful or not, and could even try kings. Another aspect of Spartan politics was the assembly, which consisted of all adult male Spartan warrior citizens, those who were legitimate Spartan birth, and who had been through the prescribed state upbringing, who had been selected to join a military-style mess, and who both were economically capable of meeting their minimum contributions of produce to their mess and had not been guilty of some act of cowardice or other disqualifying public crime or misdemeanor. The final branch of the political system was the Ephors. They were a board of 5 annually elected officials who represented the chief executive power in the Spartan state, alongside and indeed sometimes over the two kings. Whenever a king exercised his hereditary prerogative of commanding a Spartan or allied army abroad, he was accompanied by 2 of the 5 Ephors who could report back home on the king's conduct and, if necessary, initiate legal proceedings against him. How would one achieve Spartan citizenship or placement in the army? Boys until the age of 18 would have to go through the agoge, a training-based system that would prepare them for military and political life, and what their whole life would be based around once they became adults. The The making of real Spartan men began seriously at birth, when it was not the father, as was normal, but the elders of the male infant's tribal grouping who decided whether or not he should be reared. The child would be raised at home until age of 7. On his 7th birthday, he would be ripped from his family and brought up in a communal educational system. They were organized in packs and herds and placed under supervision of young adult Spartans. Once the young men displayed the appropriate toughness to be led into Spartan society, they needed to be elected into a mess, who would become their family and community to strengthen the solidarity of the military fighting unit. They would be aged 20 or so when an election would take place. A single vote was enough to get a candidate rejected. Failure to secure election to any mess at all was tantamount to exclusion from the Spartan citizen body and perhaps also army. Every aspect of Spartan life revolved around creating a tight-knit group of warriors and training them. For instance, a Spartan ate their meals with their mess. The main meal was the evening meal, and no torches were permitted when passing to or from the mess to dine, allegedly in order to habituate the Spartans to stealthy movement by night, something at which Spartan armies were indeed uniquely proficient. So important was the mess meal that only 2 reasons were accepted for an absence. Either they were fulfilling a required religious sacrifice, or they were hunting. And I know what you're thinking. Why would hunting be a valid reason? Well, each mess provided their own meat. Thus, if a Spartan was on a hunt, they were providing for their brothers in arms. The grain and olive oil foods provided at the meals were provided by the slave labor of the helots. Their most famous meal was the black broth, which was pig's legs and other pork boiled in pig's blood, salt, and vinegar. This gave the Spartans a high-protein diet, and some historians have hypothesized that the high protein in the Spartans' diet led to their bigger size compared to other Greeks. Now let's look at appearance. What would a Spartan look like? In military attire, a Spartan carried a 2-handled large round wooden shield encased in bronze on their left arm, with the Greek lambda symbol on it. Their helmet, breastplate, abdominal guard, shin guards, and arm guards were all made of bronze. Their spear was studded with a spike at both ends. They each carried a backup iron sword that was unusually short, more like a dagger than an actual sword. Finally, Spartan men were known for their long hair and a bright red cloak. The reason they grew their hair long was that Lycurgus outlined that it was a sign of a free man, because long hair hinders the performance of manual tasks. Thus, helots would have short hair because they did manual labor by toiling in the fields and provide food for the Spartans. Now let's discuss Spartan women. Their upbringing was vastly different than women in other Greek city-states. For one, Spartan women were educated, and 2, they were expected to take part in athletics. The reason for this is that Spartan women needed to match up to the high standards of Spartan men, and produce children with exceptional skill. More than just educated, they were entitled to own and manage property, including land property, in their own right. Spartan women did not have to do domestic work because helot women would perform the domestic duties. It is speculated that Spartan women did not even nurse their own children. They would use helot women as nurses. Helot nurses had a high reputation outside of Sparta, so much so that the Athenian Alcibiades reveled in the fact that he was nursed by a helot nurse. Spartans highly valued physical fitness in their women, not just their men. The more physically fit, the more likely they would produce physically fit children. Spartan marriage was rather odd because of the men's obligations to their mess. Men were expected to marry before the age of 30, and when married, until the age of 30, they had to live in the barracks with their comrades. Therefore, the only way to see their wife was to sneak away at night and be back before morning. Thus, it was said that a Spartan man could father multiple children before ever seeing his wife in daylight. On the wedding day, Spartan women had their heads shaved and expected to keep a low-crop haircut throughout the rest of their lives. Furthermore, Spartan women were famous for their scanty dress and nakedness during religious festivals. Spartan society valued women more so than other Greeks. For example, Aristotle dismissed all women as physically and mentally inferior to men. Therefore, they had no legal right to own property or attain an education. In this case, Sparta was fairly progressive in their thoughts about women. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed and learned something from this crash course about life in ancient Sparta. Have a great day. I'll see you next time.